Defying. Give it up for Greg Matsen.
All right, how's everybody doing? Isn't this incredible? I mean, this whole experience, we're about, halfway through it now on Wednesday. Just being together with 800 Latter-day Saints, going through the same experience, being with like-minded people, going on excursions, getting great food, listening to good presentations, being edified, being entertained. It's an incredible experience. And every time I've come here to do this, it's always the same thing. It's over and over again. It's just a wonderful, wonderful experience. All right. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about defying the spiral of silence. This is something I talk about on my podcast a bit. We're in a really interesting time right now. You know, back in, well, you know what? First, let's go a quick story. So some of you may have seen the channel, some of you may be followers of the channel, but quick means alive and intelligent. It's not CWIC, it's not CWIC, right? It's quick. So if you go back, you know, like into Jacobean English in the King James Version of the Bible, you get, you know, my spirit was quickened, right? I got a quickened spirit. Well, if you go back another 500, 600, 700 years into the Old English, that is the origin of it, is quick, CWIC. And the emphasis of the word at the time was on alive and intelligent. Now, the host of the show isn't necessarily very alive and intelligent, but hopefully some of the content is, and you might enjoy that. So have any of you followed me back when we did Come Follow Me even, the very beginning? Okay, so some of you. I had a smaller audience back then. We're on YouTube. We've got a podcast. We do the trips. I've got a couple of newsletters. I do some speaking engagements. That's basically quick media as a whole. And we cover gospel topics. We cover a lot of cultural issues. As Jason was saying, a lot of things that maybe some people don't always want to talk about and bring out. Current events and the controversial topics. And I've had to, as I've gone through this, I've had to get some pretty thick skin. Because as you talk about certain things that we're not used to always talking about, especially in our culture, right? You start getting a lot of feedback from a lot of different angles, from the left, from the right, from the Orthodox, from the ex-Mos, from everybody on what you're talking about. So you're putting yourself really out there, being very vulnerable and open, talking about these type of topics. But I've always felt like this is what needs to be talked about. It's got to be out in the open. We need to be able to articulate these things. Okay, this is just kind of a little thing that I put up for what quick is all about, right? Quick is for those who seek clarity over comfort. No fluff, just faithful insights that cut through noise and nourish conviction, right? As faithful as we can be. Here we lean into our belief with purpose. And I think this leaning into belief is something we really need to focus on. We have something so special. The restored gospel is such a gem. It is a pearl. And sometimes we don't lean into those things that make it that gem and that pearl. We're going to talk about that. Offer practical knowledge. I'm very into practical things, like what does this mean? Why? How does it affect me in my daily life? How does it affect you? What is? That's a question I always ask myself. What is? That to me is the truth. I want to know what is. A lot of commentary, a lot of talk about certain things, lots of narratives. What is, right? Opinion, get some of that too. Vitalize faith and charge the intellect. This is where courage meets clarity and the spiral of silence meets its match. So this is a place where I try to create an area where we can talk about things. When I first started out, I had a website, and I went to Mexico City on my mission. And so the Spanish kind of was a big part of me, it's part of the gospel. So I called the website Mormonado. And, you know, Arnold Freeberg, right, his pictures of those really buff dudes. And, you know, I can't remember who it was, maybe Mormon or Moroni or Ammon, I don't know who it was. But I had one of his pictures with one of those low-profile black hats that Clint Eastwood used to wear, you know, on top of him, or maybe a Zorro type of hat. That's what I had started with, but I had about 1,000 leaks on it, on a culture within Latter-day Saint, within the church, within the U.S., gospel topics. And this was back, I'm not sure, it was sometime between 2012 and 2015. And so I'd wanted to get this information out. I wanted it to be talked about. We had a blog, we had a chat rooms, I guess, I don't know if we called them that back then. And then one day, my wife, back in 2017 or 18, said, and here's where she broke the spiral of silence. She said, you know what? You need to go out and get on YouTube. You have to do this. We had talked about it, brought it up a few times. She's like, you need to get out and talk. Go out there and talk. And I'm just thinking, what? I'm not used to talking into a camera. Have any of you tried that? Like just sit there by yourself and put a camera in front of you and start talking to it? It's not comfortable. It's very different, right? There's no response. There's no smiling. Nothing happened, right? The camera's just the camera. But what I did start with is I wanted to talk about these cultural events. And so my family discussions at dinner were very interesting. And I loved it this way. I wanted to talk about everything. What happened today? What happened yesterday? We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about philosophy. We're going to talk about the church. Everything put through a gospel lens. So I just plopped down a microphone right in the middle of the table of dinner. And I wanted to record these discussions we had at dinner. And so we would just all sit there and talk, go over it. I had teenagers. I had others that were a little bit older. But, 3 of the 4 of my kids are millennials. And so I called it Dinner with Millennials. And I just put it out there. It'd be an hour long, 45 minutes long, hour and a half, and that's kind of what I had started with. And then Come Follow Me came along. And my wife's like, again, you're doing this. I'm like, okay, honey, I'm gonna do this. So I started doing the Come Follow Me, and I've got all 4 years of Come Follow Me that I did in those first 4 years. Loved doing that, and started to build the audience really with Come Follow Me. And somewhere around the first year, I think it was New Testament was the first year, I just couldn't hold back anymore. And because I had really wanted to talk about cultural events. I wanted to talk about who we are, what's happening in the world, what's going on, because that to me is what the gospel is for. The gospel is for how do we put this into practice? How do I form my worldview? We have an amazing worldview with the gospel. It answers all the terrible questions, right? And so I wanted to go out and do that. And so I started talking about these things. And I, of course, right away, my demographic, by the way, starting off when I was doing Come Follow Me for those first 6 to 9 months, was 80% female, 65 and older. And now it's much more balanced in there. It's about 60% male, 40% female, and a lot more of a younger audience that has come in. But it was a big change. It was a big shock for everybody. It's like, what are you doing? What is this? And so that was kind of my first pushback on things, right? First pushback on what I was talking about, about talking about things, culture and current events. And then I had these health issues. I'm just going to finish the story with this. In 2020, I got really sick. We didn't know what was going on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I had 6 surgeries within a few years. And so we finally figured some things out. And I sold my practice. Sold my practice at the time. My wife's like, you're out of here. You're done. We're going to figure all this stuff out. And so when I came back, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start something else up. I'm kind of entrepreneurial and do something else. And I had this podcast, this little podcast I was doing. And finally, I just settled on, you know what? I think I can make this work. And I'm going to go along with this podcast. And so since 2020, this is what I've been doing full time. As I go through this, what I'd like you to do is to take this personally. I'm going to tell you a lot about myself and my experiences and what I've gone through in terms of the channel, in terms of pushback and response when talking about the gospel and talking about difficult subjects. But I want this to be you. I want you to walk through those footsteps also, because this all applies to all of you. We're going to talk about the internet. We're going to talk about social media. We're going to talk about this moment that we are currently in. It is a Mormon moment, so to speak, again, where culturally, I mean, if you just go online and post a YouTube video or an Instagram reel or whatever it is online, just put in hashtag Mormon and you're going to get a lot more views. Doesn't even mean that's to Latter-day Saints. That's the environment that we're currently in. That's good and bad, right? That's both good and bad. So I'm going to go do my story. I want to talk about these Latter-day Saint influencers, this growth a little bit, but I want this to apply directly to you. The spiral of silence, what is this? So, a number of years ago, at about 2019, I was getting some feedback from a certain institution on some things that were happening. And I kept thinking to myself, why are these voices that are saying some of these things so loud? Why are they so loud? And why do these other individuals that have influence, why aren't they saying anything? You know, as far as standing up for certain principles, standing up for testimony, standing up for the gospel, standing up for their mission, whatever it might be. Why is that happening? And what happens oftentimes in our lives is that we fit into a certain narrative around us, we're immersed in it, that says, don't talk about these things. Don't bring it up. And we live in a certain culture with Latter-day Saints where there are a couple of things that are very important to us and maybe shouldn't be so important to us. Now, bear with me on this, okay? One is niceness, and one is politeness. Those are two great values, two really good values. But sometimes we take those and we put them to the very top, and those become our guiding light. And that's not what the Savior taught. That's not what the Scriptures teach. That doesn't mean we want to be contentious. That doesn't mean that we look for conflict. But it also holds us back from speaking sometimes because we don't want to ruffle any feathers. Approach is always something that's important, of course, as well. So the spiral of silence is a certain social theory. I started to look into this with this institution to see why this was all happening. I knew that the voices were a minority by far, and yet people were afraid to speak up, right? So you're staying silent as you start off. You see everybody else. It looks like it's a massive majority. In some cases for Latter-day Saints it is, but it's not always, right? They're saying we're right. Listen to us, okay? You're afraid of isolation. The dominant narrative then takes over. It's harder then to speak up. You feel shame if you do. There might be now ridicule and pressure because the narrative is becoming stronger and stronger. This could be against your beliefs. This could be for a lot of things. And finally, you end up just at the bottom of the spiral in silence because you don't want to say anything. And it just gets harder and harder and harder as you keep quiet. When the answer is to actually stand up and say something. And the earlier you do, the better off you are. Spiral of silence is a theory, is a political science and mass communication theory which states that an individual's perception of the distribution of public opinion, kind of techie, influences that individual's willingness to express their own opinions. The theory claims individuals will be more confident and outward with their opinion Hold on. We're good, okay. Let's back up one more. Confident and outward with their opinion when they notice that their personal opinion is shared throughout a group, right? So if I've got a larger group and I know there's other people, then I know that I can be more confident in saying what I'm going to say, even if you already know it's true. Even if you already know the gospel, for example, is true. But if the individual notices that their opinion is unpopular with a group, they will be more inclined to be reserved and remain silent. In other words, from the individual's perspective, not isolating themselves is more important than their own judgment. Meaning their perception of how others in the group perceive them is more important to themselves than the need for their opinion to be heard. Does this remind you of anything? Can you think of examples in your lives where this may have played a part? There's a certain chapter in the Book of Mormon that I keep thinking about when I hear this. Guy that's having a dream, right? Building on one side, a tree on the other. Okay. The spiral of silence. In many ways, what has happened is early on, I was one of the very few voices that was going out and talking about some of these things. It might be LGBTQ issues. It might be the cultural shifts that we're seeing in the United States. It might be shifts that we see within the church. And so I'd get all these responses coming back, and I kind of had this strange ear to the ground on things that I don't know how it happened. I really don't know how that really happened, but it did. And so I'd have all of this feedback from all different parts of the world, from mostly the United States, on different issues that started to happen. In the early days, here's a few quotes that I got from very orthodox members of the church as I was starting to talk about this. Now, this wouldn't happen today. This was just 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Who died and made you the prophet? Have you had hands laid on your head to teach and talk about these issues? I have reported you to my stake president. If everyone were to speak about these things, it would drown out the words of our prophets and apostles. This isn't right. Funny, I've never seen you speak at General Conference. You do not have the authority to speak about the church or these family issues, okay? So again, now you go out there online and you see everybody's talking about these cultural issues. Everybody, we have to. We have to speak about these things because we're being drowned out by negative voices against the church, negative voices of Babylon, so to speak, that are influencing us and our family members. We have no choice. We have to be able to speak and say things. Here's Russell M. Nelson. We live in a world that is complex and increasingly contentious, but the gospel of Jesus Christ is neither complicated nor contentious. There is absolutely no need for you to be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ ever. Now, I would submit that that includes not speaking up and not saying something. There is a big difference between contention and conflict. I'm going to show a quote in a little bit from Neil A. Maxwell. And as the gospel sits, boom, right here, and the world continues to drift off over here, if I decide I'm going to stand here, the more I stand here and say the things that I believe in and stand for and am anchored on, the more conflict it's going to create. That is inevitable. Conflict is going to be, it's not always going to happen, but overall, conflict is going to be inevitable. Contention is something completely different. That's my attitude. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm usually trying to be personal with somebody else. And that's completely different, right? David A. Bednar, I love this. Discipleship is not a spectator sport. So how are you involved? I love looking back at the restored gospel and how things started to unfold. And an understanding of the restored gospel, the restored scriptures, go back and look at the first vision. Something very interesting happened that changed the paradigm and everything forever. With Joseph Smith, he sees two different beings, Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. Right? That changed everything. What happened is you ended up with a plurality. There's a plurality here. You go to the book of Moses, restored scripture, and you get this vision that Moses is having, and he sees all these plurality of worlds. And yet, God is talking to him personally as Moses, my son. And you go over to the book of Abraham, restored scripture, and Abraham is looking through the Urim and Thummim. And he's told about all the different spirits, one above another, one below. And some of them are great and noble. And Abraham, you are one of them. This plurality that is offered to us throughout all of this restored scripture. The council in heaven. Why is this so important? Why is this new revealing of this plurality so important for the restored gospel? And I'll tell you what I think. I think it's because it tells you who you are and that you are intricately involved in the plan of God. You are a part of it. It's not just for you. You're a part of it. And so the restored gospel is a participatory gospel. We all help each other out. It is not a God up here and man down here, and I just need to believe, right? It is, I need to become more like him, and that is through involvement. That is through charity. That is through loving others. That is through getting involved. That is through speaking out. So I happen to know that, again, there's this explosion going online here of faithful voices. I mean, really booming right now online. It's about time. It's about time. The church would like to see, and other institutions closely tied to the church would like to see, that the church's content is about 70% of the content out there. When I say the content, the online content, I mean the views, the number of views, right? And that 30% would come from independent individuals. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's actually going to be the opposite. I think that we are going to explode with independent voices online. And I think we are at the very, very tip of the iceberg right now as to where things are going to go. There are influencers out there right now that are getting a seat at the table, even within mainline Christianity or mainstream Christianity. Things are changing very, very quickly. The conversation is changing very, very quickly, and it's because individuals are willing to step up and talk and say something. Still today, with that explosion, we are drowning with anti-voices that are out there. I'm not going to say the names here, but this is just in December in 2025 in YouTube views. Now, there are a lot of more views on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, etc. But YouTube is an interesting place because YouTube is a deeper dive. If I'm going to pull up a video and watch through it, right, that is where there's a bigger chance that I'm going to be influenced. I'm going to learn more information going through that. The number one anti-voice out there here had 4,506,557 views on YouTube alone, just in December. Okay. Another one, C2C, 2,941,000. JD, MS, you probably know who that is for sure, 1,335,000. Now there are a handful of non-institutional, non-church, independent LDS voices out there that will reach about that bottom line. Probably 3, maybe 2 on YouTube. Okay, but that's it. That's all that will get to that point. So we are still battling online against these voices that are out there that are effective. They're very effective. And this is, again, where it starts to get personal for all of us. We all know here that, well, we all know somebody, more than likely, within our immediate family, our extended family, who has left the church. And you might know the exact reason, you might not know the exact reason. But a lot of it does have to do with more information and these mists of darkness, these mists of darkness that are coming out online. And we need voices to be able to fight against that. And that can be tough. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone in this audience needs to go find a camera or get it on their iPhone and get a mic and start talking into it and publish it. Some of you might, and that would be fantastic. Okay? But it does mean that all of us need to stand up a little bit more, and we all need to speak up a little bit more. And there are some ways to be able to do that. This is part of what's going on here also. You may have seen him, and this has nothing to do with the politics or anything like that. This is just young voices, and this is what's so exciting. Yeah, there are more.
Someone's calling me.
Let's go ahead. Okay. Hold on here. Okay, I worked at sound check. We're going to want these to work. Okay, come on.
All right, if Christianity is going to outlive this moment right now where there is like a surge of interest in Christianity, is the future Roman Catholic or is it Protestant? And
What about Mormons?
Hold on. That's not Christianity at all.
I don't know about
Not the
that
same
one.
team. Different team. Okay, but is there more that Protestants need to steal from Catholics or more that the Catholics need to go back and relearn from the Reformation?
Well, listen, I love the Reformation because it gave us the Counter-Reformation. So I do have an answer to this, and it's not my own. It comes from...
Hold on. I'll try it from here. Or not. Okay.
Someone's calling. A PDF. They're saying all these crazy allegations. I'm like, hey, what sucks for them is they're never going to get me.
This is in
I
front
don't
of
drink
millions of
alcohol.
people.
I don't do drugs. I'm a virgin. I don't have sex with random girls. You're not going to catch me on no sex allegation charges. I don't have any addictions. I don't have any vices. So what are these people going to get me for? They're done. I'm religious. I believe in God. I'm everything they hate.
I love that.
And so
Okay, I may have to run through these videos here. I'm not sure why that's happening, but you had Nick Shirley, right, who's out, and here he is, this 23-year-old kid. He went to Chile on his mission. He's been home for 2 years, and he's out talking, and beyond all the politics or anything else, he's on this massive podcast show, and he's telling everybody, I don't drink, I don't smoke, basically I live the law of chastity, I'm a virgin. He's telling this to the whole world unabashedly without any problems, right? And we're seeing more and more of this from this younger Gen Z generation. Kai, I want to say Schwimmer is his name, is on another show. Millions of people watching this show. And this guy comes up and he asks this question to an evangelical and to Michael Knowles, who is a Catholic. And the guy says, what direction is America going in? Do we need to pull more from the Catholics or do we need to pull more from the Protestants? And Kai, a young guy sitting on the panel, says, hey, wait a minute, what about the Mormons? And this guy over here says, now, first of all, to say that in the first place, good for him, right? Just starting off. He's just saying something right away, no problem. And the guy with the question comes over here and he says, no, we don't consider them Christian at all. Totally different team. Totally different team. And Kai comes back and he says, no, let me tell you about apostolic succession. Let me tell you what it's like to have a prophet, and we receive direct revelation from the prophets ongoing, right? And going over and over again, the strength of the family, the strength of the gospel on a political show, right, with millions of people. And we're starting to see that more and more. We love to see, if you like BYU, Coach Sataki got out and started talking about his testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ after the bowl win that they had a week or two ago. Right? And so these are not isolated events. There is something completely changing online right now where you've got more and more voices. My friend Jacob Hansen, who will be speaking tomorrow, he is getting a seat at the table talking to the largest Christian and Catholic influencers in the country. right? Talking to them, debating them, having theological discussions with them, and he's a part of that. Completely different. Now, there's something to understand about this. The church can't do that. The church can't do that. And they don't want to do that. In 2018, I think it was Elder Pearson went to a FAIR conference. FAIR is an apologetic organization for the church, apologetic for the church. And he had just come from a meeting with the 12. And there was a Q&A after his talk, and they said, and one of the questions was something to the effect of, well, what can we do to stand up and speak on these things? I mean, what does the average Joe and Jill do about talking about the gospel? And he said, look, we need, at this time it was, Mormon Interpreter, we need FAIR. Back then it was FAIR, Book of Mormon Central, right? A few of these institutional voices, and everybody else talking about the church. We can't do it. We can't do all of these things, and there's things that you can say that the church can't say, and a way for you to approach individuals that the church can't do. And I do get the sense sometimes that in ways we've kind of abdicated our responsibility to the church in this with our voices. And one of the amazing things about the internet and one of the amazing things about social media is that we can do it. We can go out there. We don't need hands from the prophet on our head to call us to go out and testify of Jesus Christ and to offer our testimonies. And we can do this at work. We can do this wherever we are. If we start to defy the spiral of silence. Now let me see if we can get a little bit further into this. Okay, that's Kai, by the way, on the right. I'm not going to try and play it. Okay, so again, how can you defy the spiral of silence? Are you subject to it now? Don't take this in the wrong way. Are you too nice? It doesn't mean you need to be mean. You don't need to be contentious. Are you too polite? Where does the truth stand in your values hierarchy? How much do you participate in the gospel of participation? Okay, this one's a little bit, well, so about 6 years ago, are you guys familiar with Mormon Stories? I hate to even bring this up, but I'm very much against putting my head in the sand. Mormon Stories is one of the, well, we know from certain studies, it is the #1 place that has pulled people away from the church. Right? It's an anti-Mormon podcast and YouTube channel. And 6 years ago, the guy who runs it, John DeLynn, invited me on the show. And I wanted to go. I'm like, let's do this thing. I've got a little bit of that fight in me, I was like, I could stand up for this. I know I can do this really well, and very prideful and for me. And and my wife says, no, you're not going on. And you know how you negotiate things with your spouse? Well, this went nowhere for me. Absolutely nowhere. It was like one of those lines that you draw. She had drawn. It's just like, no, not happening. Why would you do that? You're not going to do that. I had my reasons, though. So a couple years later, he contacted me again, and he had done a reaction video on one of my episodes on the podcast that just kind of hammering me, and he said, well, Craig, I'd love you to have a voice on what we said, and, invited me back again. My wife said, no, you're not doing this. And then a third time came a year or two later, and no, Craig, you're not doing this. So a couple of months ago, I went to lunch with John DeLynn. And I talked to him for about 3 hours. And why would I do that? Maybe it's wrong. I don't think it was. I wanted the dialogue. I'm not going to let the spiral of silence hold me back on this. I want to talk to him, and that doesn't mean I'm going to have to be nicey nice. That doesn't mean that I need to be too polite. I was very direct with him. And we talked for a while. And then eventually, he invited me back onto the show again. So, have you ever done this, guys? Like I said yes, and I hadn't talked to my wife yet. It's kind of like that first car I bought, and I didn't say anything to her. That was not good. That was not good. But I had, as I told this to my wife, I had a camera, my phone ready for her to see how she would respond. That is my wife, kind of. And she would kill me if she saw that up there right now. She's not here. So listen, this is a pact between you guys and me right now. Right now. Brian, Christine, Garrett, Nadine, everybody. Zip. Nobody's saying a word, right? I'll never do this again. But she's wondering why. Why would you do this? You know? So anyway, I'm never going to do a picture like that again. Except for maybe this one. So afterward, this was kind of how she was, right? You and your podcast. That's not really her, obviously, but it kind of looks like her. And let me tell you why I did this. And I hope I got to get a little bit of this video working here. I'm hoping that this works. What if, in trying to defy the spiral of silence, I could get to a place to people that nobody else gets to? What if I went on this show and I wasn't talking to John? Most of John's audience are never Mo's, they call them. They've never been members of the church. They just love going in there and hearing everybody dunk on the church. But they don't really know much about the church, right? They just love hearing this kind of negative, critical approach to the Mormons, right? And there's a certain segment of that group, I know, who I've spoken to many times, who watch it, but they don't participate in we'll call it the mob, right? The anti-Mormon mob at all. But they're interested in theology. They're interested in religion. And then there's another group that watches him. And that other group is those that are going through a faith crisis. So what if someone is going through a faith crisis and they go on there and they're just hoping to hear negative things to make their decisions easier, right? Maybe I'm already stepping down that road. And this will just make it easier if I keep watching this and get in this silo, right, of getting these things back. Or maybe I'm still not sure about what's going on and I'm looking around. And that's who I wanted to talk to, those two groups. And my wife supported me in going on, by the way. She did end up supporting me in going on. But despite what friends said, and despite what many of my family members said, I knew it was the right thing to do. And I know it's the right thing to do because I know I'm standing on the truth. I know that's my anchor. It's not because of me, but I know the truth. So if I've got this solid ground that I can stand on, it doesn't matter if it's him or anybody else. I mean, I talked to him for 3 hours. He could have thrown anything at me. I didn't know the direction it would go. I did put some ground rules down. But I know from the feedback from people that watched that show that the objectives that I had were reached. So I'm going to try this. I don't know that it's going to work. This is actually what he ended up putting on the thumbnail. Doubt strengthened my faith. Boy, this is too bad. Okay, well, I'll just tell you. So we went through the discussion, almost 3 hours, and toward somewhere in the middle of the third hour, this is what he says to me. He says, Greg, and this is just, it's just shocking, right? He says, Greg, would you like to bear your testimony? Would you like to bear your testimony? And so I did. And I bore my testimony. And he said, for those of you that I didn't...
One last question. For those who are struggling in their faith and want to hang on, do you have a...
No! The spiral of silence. Give it 10 seconds. We will just keep talking. Basically, he says, is there anything you want to say to them? Is there anything you want to say to them? Or would you like to bear your testimony? Right? And so I went on and bore my testimony and was able to talk directly to those two groups.
Testimony or words of encouragement for them?
Well, this might be a little odd on this show.
And you can bear your testimony. I would welcome that.
Yeah. So for me, I will, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
I'll just say a few things. It's not the standard thing you're going to hear, but
I love it.
There are three ways that I look at this and with truth and what my faith journey has been, right? The first is I have studied the gospel. Right, I have decades of studying this, and I understand people study different, have different conclusions, but these are my conclusions. I've studied, I have put the puzzle pieces together. I don't have them all there, but I can see what the picture is. And I intellectually have a testimony. I intellectually see the truth, I believe, right? Secondly, and I think this is very important, I've said this a lot, faith, I hope, if there was one thing I would try and get across to anybody here, regardless if you can't stand what I've said or you like what I've said, faith is not belief. Faith is not belief. And so you could believe something, I could believe something, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. Faith is trust. That is the Latin word that it comes from, fidere. It is that faith is trust, and trust is the most real thing you can have because it can't lie to you. Trust is not going to lie to you. And so do I have faith in the gospel? Yes. Do I have faith in God? Yes. But the only reason I have faith is because I've tested it. I have proven it. And just like it says in the Book of Mormon, I do the exact same thing as the scientific method. Exactly the same. It is, I am going to experiment. Alma even uses those words. I'm going to take an experiment. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to prove it. I'm going to try it out. That is the only reason you can know, right? And you hear a lot of times, well, it's, you don't have knowledge beforehand, or you don't, your knowledge comes, or rather, faith can't be trust. Faith is just, you got.
Okay. Anyway, I don't want to go too long on that. So I was able to go through in another few minutes and bear my testimony on this. We are in a very specific moment in time that we should all be participating in. This explosion online doesn't need to be just online, but you know what it can do? It can help you feel encouraged, emboldened in being able to speak the truth. We have a gem, an absolute gem in the gospel. And to sit on it makes no sense. And I think that right now, that time that we are being called to gather Zion, to build Zion, and to speak up about our truths. Now, sometimes we need to find those places to find that. Carrie had brought, well, there's Carrie's podcast, there's Jacob's podcast, there's Kevin Prince's podcast. There are a lot of great podcasts out there where you can go out and you can learn how to articulate what you feel if you haven't been able to do that before. That's the number one response I get, feedback. I've never been able to put this into words. But I know this is what I have felt. I've always felt this, but I've never been able to put this into words. So it's a knowledge of the doctrine, but it's the ability to speak. It's the ability to articulate what you know to be true. And there's some things out there that aren't great sometimes in the world. That's the way it is. It's the partaking of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Not everything is great online, but you can find the right resources. And I think that's what President Nelson is talking about when he says that we've got to be able to have the spirit of discernment. There's a lot of wild stuff out there, but you can find the right things and you can feel the spirit and you can know what is true. Real quick, I'm ending with these couple of quotes. The gospel has always been countercultural and always will be. If you're following the culture, you might take a second thought on that. Defend your beliefs with courtesy and with compassion, but defend them. We do not apologize for our beliefs. We simply try to explain them, find ways to be able to explain it. True doctrine understood, is where you want to find the right sources, changes attitudes and behavior. The Savior needs you to be his disciples boldly and courageously. This is the same man that said, don't be contentious. But stand on truth. Stand on an anchor. And this is more true today than it was back then. Neutrality in this war is impossible. Either men are for the kingdom of God or they are against it. It's my prayer, I hope that all of us can have a sense of defying the spiral of silence. You might be an introvert. You might not speak up, talk. I think that there is a spirit that is going on right now within the church and around the world that allows us to be able to get our message out there. I think that in 5 or 10 years from now, we are not going to recognize the limited understanding that others have of our church. I think that it will be spread out. I think there's no way around it. I don't think it can be held back. Thank you for your time.